Welcome to Real Talk with Archie Jones, which is me. Today, we're going to have a quick chat about communism. It's going to get interesting, so hang in there. See you in a second. All right, let's talk about something that might make you a little uncomfortable. Nah, it's not visiting your in-laws at Christmas, all right? I can promise you that. I'm talking about the idea that slowly but surely, this sneaky infiltration of a communist ideology into the West. Yeah, I know. It sounds like a plot from some kind of Cold War movie, doesn't it, hey? Right? Yeah? But here's the kicker. There's actually some weight behind it. I know. I'm not about to tell you to wear a tinfoil hat, okay? That's my normal play, but not today. Not today. And I guarantee you're not going to be told to run away and move to the woods, all right? Just bear with me. Stay with me to the end on this one, guys, okay? Anyway, yeah. So let's just throw back to when I was born, yeah? The good old days. Back in the 80s, all right? A guy named Yuri Bezmenov, a former KGB agent turned defector, tried to sound the alarm, yeah? He wasn't just waving his arms. He wasn't just screaming out loud. He wasn't talking about war, yeah? He wasn't talking about tanks rolling in. He explained something much, much more sinister, much quieter, yeah? Something called ideological subversion. Basically, it's the idea that you don't need to conquer a country with guns when you can rot it from the inside. It's like termites in a wooden house. You don't see them at first until one day the floor, the wall, the roof, it collapses. It's slow and it's insidious. Now, look, I get it, okay? This guy sounds a little out there, yeah? He sounds a guy warning about societal collapse in the 80s. Most people probably just dismissed him back then. Yeah, think about how good it was. I mean, I was a kid, but it was good days, wasn't it, eh? And just like now, if it was said, it would be dismissed. Because that's the thing. When you start talking about ideological subversion, it gets slapped down with a big fat conspiracy theory label, doesn't it? You know what, though? There is an uncomfortable truth here. There is a very uncomfortable truth. History is full of examples, littered with examples where people ignored warnings until it was too late. So the question isn't whether we're paranoid, okay? It's whether we are paying attention. Here's what we're going to do today. Yeah, this is what we're going to get into. We are going to unpack this whole concept. Yeah, what Bezmenov warned us about, what other defectors hinted at, and most importantly, whether any of this is actually happening today. And I'm not going to ask you. I am not going to ask you to listen to what I say. I'm going to ask you to just listen and then fact check and then make your own decisions, okay? Because let's face it, yeah? Let's face it. If there's one thing the internet's good at, it's screaming about conspiracies. But there are signs, real, tangible signs, that the termites have been very, very busy. And hey, let's not forget, this isn't about fear-mongering, okay? Or lighting a bonfire in the middle of your living room. This is about connecting a couple of dots, yeah? A couple of cheeky little dots, and maybe asking questions we're not supposed to ask. Because if there is even a little truth to this, wouldn't you want to know? I know I would. I mean, when I started going down this rabbit hole, it was more an inquiry. And, now, I don't know. I'm just going to put out my data and look, I'll listen to what you guys have got to say. So look, just grab a coffee or a drink, and if this kind of stuff stresses you out, then, maybe a stiff one. But let's just dive in. Let's just dive straight into the world of ideological subversion. And, is it just Cold War paranoia that never died? Or are we actually living through what Bezmenov and others warned us about? Yeah? Let's get straight into it, okay? So just to kick off, we're going to actually look at Bezmenov's blueprint for subversion. Yeah. So let's just kick off with this guy, Yuri Bezmenov. Okay. If you've never heard of him, think of him like the whistleblower before whistleblowing was a hashtag. Yeah. He was a KGB agent who defected to Canada in the 70s. And instead of laying low, keeping his head down, and, maybe, I don't know, opening a bakery or something, he went on a mission to spill every bean he could about the Soviet strategies for world domination. His biggest warning, he said the Soviet Union didn't need to launch a full-on war against the West. Nope. All they needed to do was slowly, methodically mess with our heads. Now, Bezmenov, had a fancy term for it, and we've already said this word a million times already, but it's ideological subversion. I just want to get that in your head, okay? It sounds like something you'd hear in a political science class, but it's basically the art of breaking a country without anyone realizing it's broken. And here's the kicker. He said it worked in 4 stages, 4 simple steps to dismantle an entire society. Yeah. Are you ready for this? Because it's honestly kind of genius in this. And look, it's kind of genius in a terrifying, if true, way. Yeah. It's genius if it's true. And if it's not, this guy was a great storyteller. So let's just roll. So look, stage 1, demoralization. This is where you hit people where it hurts. So you target their values, their culture, their institutions. You make them doubt everything. Religion, mock it. Family, tear it down. Patriotism, turn it into a dirty word. The goal here is to destabilize the very foundation of what makes society function. And Yuri didn't pull this out of thin air. He said the Soviets specifically targeted universities. And you know why? Because that's where the next generation of thinkers, leaders, and TikTok influencers come from. All right. Maybe not TikTok, all right? It was in the 80s, but you get the point, okay? Now, he put it, it takes 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why? Because that's the minimum time it takes to educate a generation of students in the enemy's ideology. Bear in mind, this is a minimum time frame, okay? Now let that sink in. 15 to 20 years. That's how long it takes to plant seeds and watch the tree of chaos grow. And look at our election cycles. We're focused on 3 to 5 year periods, and these guys are playing chess while we're playing checkers. Now, you tell me though, you tell me, does that sound familiar to 15 to 20 years? Look around. Do we not live in a world where everything is questioned, ridiculed, or labeled problematic? You've got schools teaching kids more about activism than arithmetic. We've got social media, and it's full of tearing people down. It's full of ripping apart cultural traditions, and they probably couldn't even explain them to you if you gave them a dictionary. Yeah, but they attack and attack and attack relentlessly, and we're all so busy arguing about it, aren't we, that we don't even notice the bigger picture. So, all right, let's just get into stage 2, destabilization. Now, this is where you go beyond attacking the culture and start poking at the infrastructure, the economy, the military, the law enforcement, you name it, the foundations. Look, according to Bezmenov, the goal here is to make people lose trust in the very systems that keep society running. Sound familiar? Sound familiar at all? Hey? Yeah. Well, let me paint the picture for you. Let me just paint this straight away. How many times have you heard phrases like defund the police or abolish capitalism in the last few years? I'm not saying there's no room for reform, okay? And just please don't cancel me just yet, because this is just a conversation, all right? But Bezmenov warned us that these exact kind of movements could be weaponized. And when you've weakened law enforcement, you create chaos. When you destabilize the economy, you create desperation. And what happens when people are desperate? What happens? They'll accept just about anything that promises to fix it, even if that anything comes with strings attached. You know, we all want to feed our kids. We all want to be in a warm, warm or cool environment. We want clothes, we want safety, we want security. And, you take enough of that away and people are going to be begging for it. And this brings us on to stage 3, okay? This is the one that really gets interesting. Crisis. This is the big event, the moment where all that chaos boils over. The idea is to push society into such a state of panic that the people practically beg for radical change. Imagine a scenario where the economy collapses, there's violence in the streets, and nobody knows who to trust anymore. Sounds extreme? Yeah, maybe. But think about how we've handled recent crises, yeah? A pandemic, it hits overnight. Governments around the world lock people in their homes, close businesses, roll out sweeping new policies. And some of it was needed, sure, absolutely no doubt. But how much of it stuck around? How much control did people willingly give up because they were scared? And then, my friends, we've got stage 4, normalization. And remember, these can be done over and over again. It's not like all things done at once, okay? But this is where the bad guys just walk in, dust off their hands and say, see, crisis averted, you're welcome. Except by this point, you've rewritten all the rules. They've rewritten all the rules. And you've got new laws, new systems, new leaders, all promising stability. And we lap it up. We lap it up because we're so damn relieved that the chaos is over. Bezmenov said this is the end game. The moment where you don't even realize how much you've given away because it's been normalized, yeah? And he wasn't talking about some distant dystopia. He said this stuff was already happening when he defected. And let me tell you, when you start looking at the world through his lens, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee it. Demoralization, check. Destabilization, feels like we're in it. Crisis, we've had a few. Normalization, well, you tell me. You tell me. You might wonder, yeah, why go to all this trouble? Why not just invade or bomb your enemies into submission? But Bezmenov made it clear the Soviets didn't want the cost or the risk of open conflict. Ideological subversion was their weapon of choice because it was cheap, effective, and invisible. I mean, think about it. Think about that. If you can convince a society to destroy itself from within, you don't have to lift a finger. It's the ultimate long game. So here's the big question. Were these guys just paranoid defectors? Just trying to sell a good story, give themselves a role in the new society? Or did they leave a blueprint, Did they leave us a blueprint? One that we've ignored for decades. And that's what we're going to dive into next. Because if any of this is true, we might already be living in stage 4. Scary thought, hey? Now we're going to explore some modern signs of ideological subversion, okay? So, all right. Now that we've got Bezmenov's blueprint laid out, let's look around and see if any of this sounds familiar. And I'm not saying we're all secretly living in a Cold War, kind of scenario, some kind of bloody spy novel. But let's be real. Some of this hits a little bit too close to the bone, doesn't it? So let's just have a quick look at a step-by-step breakdown and see if this kind of ideological subversion thing might be playing out in today's world. Just a little heads up, this may get a little bit uncomfortable, okay? It may get a little bit uncomfortable. So let's start with stage 1, demoralization. Bezmenov said the first step to breaking a society is to undermine its values, its culture, its institutions. And look, I'm not saying we should all be singing the national anthem every morning. I'm not an idiot, all right? But you got to admit, there's been a major shift in how we think about everything. And take education, for example. Schools used to be about teaching kids how to think, reading, math, science, the basics for life. Now, it's like every other day there's a new theory being like rammed down their throats in the classroom. And I'm not just talking about, critical race theory or whatever the latest buzzword is. I'm talking about the whole vibe of education shifting from here's how the world works to here's why the world is broken and it's all your fault. You've got kids leaving school more confused about, their identity than their algebra homework. And it's not just the schools. Look at the media. Have you noticed how every headline these days seems to be designed to either make you seriously pissed off or freaking terrified? I mean, outrage culture isn't just annoying, it's strategic. It keeps us divided and distracted. Bezmenov said that when people are constantly questioning their values and institutions, they lose the ability to fight back instead of coming together. We're too busy tearing each other apart. And don't even get me started on how we treat history, yeah? It used to be about learning from the past, the good, the bad, the ugly. Now it's like the only history that gets taught is the bad stuff, colonialism, slavery, oppression. Yeah, those things happened and we need to talk about them. But when that's all you teach, you're not creating informed citizens. You're creating people who think everything is about the country is a mistake. That it's textbook demoralization. Bezmenov would have been nodding his head right now like, I told you so. I told you so. It's almost certain. And then look, stage 2. Yeah, all right, look, we're going to go into destabilization. This is where things start getting real messy. Bezmenov said, you target the systems that hold society together, the economy, law enforcement, government institutions, and you weaken them to the point where people stop trusting them altogether. I mean, let's just kick off talking about the economy for a second, okay? What's the vibe out there right now? Are people struggling to buy houses? Inflation's through the roof. Every time you go to the supermarket, you're out of pocket, and every other politician is either yelling about capitalism or being the problem or promising that the government will save the day. And here's the thing, the stabilizing an economy isn't about making everyone poor overnight, okay? Because that would cause complete chaos. It's about creating a slow burn where people feel like they're running in place, they're in quicksand. You dangle the dream in front of them, a good job, a house, a future for the kids, but it's always just out of reach. That's how you create resentment and desperation. And desperate people, they are way, way easier to control. Another key part of destabilization is making people feel like the system is rigged. Raising wealth inequality isn't just an economic issue, it's a trust issue. When you see billionaires getting richer, while they, and we can't even buy a house, of course it's going to create resentment, and resentment left unchecked, it leads to chaos. And that's exactly what Bezmenov said would happen. A society that feels betrayed by its leaders is ripe for collapse. I mean, everything, like even people paying rent, are just in this unstable cycle of, can I afford the rent? When will it go up? Along with all the other costs of living. And then let's just move on to, let's just jump, I don't know, let's say law enforcement, yeah? And I'm not here to debate whether police reform is needed. We all know there are issues. Yep, there are issues. And reform, when done well in consultation with the people, I've got no problem with it, yeah? But have you noticed how the conversation isn't just about reform anymore? It's about removal. Defund the police. It wasn't just a hashtag, it was a movement. And Bezmenov warned us about this exact kind of thing. He said that one of the keys to destabilization is making people lose faith in institutions meant to protect them. Because if you can make people unsafe, if you can make them feel unsafe, like they can't trust the cops or the courts or the government, then you're setting the stage for chaos, for madness. And madness, chaos, disorder, my friends, is where the real fun begins. And then, moving on to the stage 3, the crisis. Yeah, this is where all that demoralization and destabilization pays off. According to Bezmenov, this is the tipping point of no return. The goal is to create a situation so chaotic, so overwhelming that people are desperate for a solution, any solution. Now, let me ask you this. How many times in the past few years, have we faced a major crisis that just seemed to change everything overnight? Think about it. A global pandemic hits and suddenly the governments are rolling out emergency measures left and right, lockdowns, mandates, massive spending packages. It all felt necessarily in the moment. Yeah, it felt necessary at the moment. We were scared, sure. But here's the thing. Emergency powers, they're a lot easier to roll out than they are to roll back. And when we're all distracted by the immediate crisis, new policies and systems are quietly being put into place. You ever hear the phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste? Well, that's stage 3 in a nutshell. In a nutshell. Bezmenov said that during a crisis, people will accept solutions they'd never even considered during normal times. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. And here's the thing about crises. They don't have to be manufactured to be exploited. Take 9/11. It was a real tragedy. But look at what followed. The Patriot Act, mass surveillance, entire wars justified on shaky evidence. Bezmenov warned that during a crisis, people will accept solutions that they'd never tolerate otherwise, whether it's for safety, stability, or convenience. We give up our freedoms without even realizing it. And once they're gone, they rarely come back. Think about how many laws have been applied and repealed, and ask yourself that question. If we may take 3 steps forward and 1 step back, but we never take the 3 steps back. And that brings us on to stage 4, normalization. This is the end game. Bezmenov said the goal of all this chaos is to create a new normal where the old rules don't apply anymore. And here's the scary part. You don't even realize it's happening because you've been so worn down by everything else. Take technology, for example. Digital IDs, social credit systems, surveillance tech. These things, they're being rolled out in the name of safety and convenience. And yeah, some of it might be useful, but at what cost? You don't need a tinfoil hat to wonder if we're getting a little too comfortable handing over control. Oh, it's just a vaccine passport, no big deal. Oh, it's just a facial recognition camera, what's the harm? If you've got nothing to hide, then why worry? But add all this stuff together and suddenly you've got a system where every part of your life is monitored and controlled. That's normalization. You don't notice the cage because it's being built 1 bar at a time. So here's where we're at. Bezmenov laid out a blueprint decades ago. And when you connect the dots, it's hard not to wonder if we're following it, we're following the script. Demoralization, check. Destabilization, check. Crisis, check. Normalization, it's creeping in. And the scariest part, most of us are too distracted by the latest Netflix series to even notice. I reckon they should have added distraction in, to be honest. They really, really should. But hey, Maybe all this, let's just play devil's advocate for a minute. Maybe all this is just a coincidence, okay? Maybe these are just natural shifts in modern society and there's nothing to worry about. Or maybe, just maybe, Bezmenov was trying to warn us about something that we're too blind or too scared to see. So, is it just a conspiracy theory? All right, this is the question that's probably rolling around your head right now, because I know it's rolling around mine. Is this all just one big conspiracy theory? I mean, come on. Demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization. It sounds like a rejected plot for the next Mission Impossible, doesn't it? But just because something sounds crazy doesn't mean it isn't true. I mean, who would have believed 20 years ago that you'd be arguing with a refrigerator on what to order you from Amazon? Yet here we are, right now. And let's get one thing straight. History is absolutely stuffed with things that sounded like conspiracy theories until they weren't. Remember when people laughed at the idea of government surveillance? Then along came Edward Snowden, and suddenly, it's like, by the way, the NSA's been reading your emails and probably knows about that weird thing you Googled at 2 a.m. Yeah, a bit awkward, isn't it? Yeah, but it's right there. It's right there. Or take Operation Mockingbird. This was one of the CIA's actual documented program to influence the media. Not a fringe theory, real. They were paying journalists to push certain narratives. So the next time someone rolls their eyes and says, the media would never lie to us, just remind them, we've got receipts. And let's not forget MK Ultra. Let us never forget MK Ultra. Another gem from the CIA. Back in the 50s and 60s, they were literally drugging people with LSD to see if they could control their minds. Mind control. I mean, dude, come on. And if that doesn't scream conspiracy nut job, I don't know what does. Except, wait, it happened. And the only reason we even know about it is because a few files accidentally got declassified. Imagine what didn't slip through the cracks. But here's where it gets tricky. Just because some conspiracies turned out to be true doesn't mean every guy on YouTube, including me, yelling about lizard people, are the prophets. The problem is that when you mix plausible stuff with batshit crazy stuff, it's hard to tell, what's what. And that's by design. If you flood the zone with nonsense, the real stories get lost in the noise. I mean, let's take 9/11, for example. Now, I'm not saying it was an inside job, all right? I'm not about to get a knock on my door by the men in black suits. It's not for me. But you can't deny there are questions. Like, how did Building 7 fall? Or, my one of my favorites is, how does a guy in a cave halfway around the world completely outsmart the world's most advanced intelligence agencies? I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm just saying it doesn't exactly, pass the sniff test, does it? But here's where it ties back to Bezmenov. He didn't say the Soviets are going to micromanage every event. He said they'd create the conditions for societies to unravel themselves. And when you look at the chaos of the last 20 years, endless wars, economic collapses, political divisions, it's hard not to think, is this just natural evolution of a complex society? Or are we being played like some kind of cheap-ass ukulele? And here's what's wild. Flooding the zone with nonsense is part of the playbook. Bezmenov said that, when you mix the truth with absurdity, people stop paying attention. It's like a boy who cried wolf. But instead of a wolf, it's an avalanche of half-baked conspiracy theories, flat earth theories, lizard people. It's all noise designed to bury the real stories, because if no one knows what's real anymore, they'll stop trying to figure it out. And AI is only the next layer on this cake. Now, let's just zoom in. Let's zoom into these modern times, because this is where it gets freaky, okay? Take the idea of normalization. And have you noticed how easily we accept things that would have seemed insane just a few years ago, like digital IDs? Everyone's like, oh, it's just for convenience. It's just so you don't lose your passport. Okay, cool. But how long before the same ID gets tied to your bank account, your job, and whether or not you're allowed to travel? Sounds far-fetched, right? Well, literally, that is what China is doing with their social credit system. You jaywalk, and suddenly you can't buy a train ticket. And if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, if that doesn't send a chill, I don't know what will. And don't even get me started on surveillance. Do you know how many cameras are out there right now? You can't sneeze on the street without someone capturing it in HD. And people just shrug it off and go, oh, but I don't have anything to hide. Really? Well, good for you, St. Margaret. But the rest of us would prefer not to have every embarrassing moment archived for eternity. Thank you very much. And here's the cold, hard truth. You don't need some shadowy group of villains meeting in a smoky room to manipulate society. All you need is a little nudge here, little nudge there, a little chaos, here and there. And before you know it, people are willing to give up their freedoms. And the best part, they think it's their idea. It's pretty much the same as my wife when she wants a bathroom renovation, sows the seeds over years, breaks me down. And then boom, before I know it, I'm bloody scraping grout off a wall. And Bezmenov said, the biggest weapon of ideological subversion isn't the bombs or the guns, it's apathy. And getting people so distracted, so divided that they stop asking the big questions. And just take a look around. Take a look around. Are we not distracted? Are we not divided? We're too busy arguing about pronouns on Twitter to, notice the bigger picture. And that, my friends, is the real conspiracy. So is all this just paranoia? Maybe. Or maybe it's a wake-up call. But here's the thing. Even if half of what Bezmenov said is true, it doesn't make any sense, not to pay attention to it, does it? Because history has a funny way of repeating itself. And if we're not careful, we might just be living through one of those chapters of, future generations will look back on and be like, how the hell didn't they see it? Think about that. Now we look back in the past and we think that our future generations will look back and they may just well see the same thing. So here's my final thoughts on this, okay? Here we are. We've gone through some warnings, we've connected some dots, and maybe ruffled a few feathers along the way, I don't know. But the big question is, what do we do? What do we do with this? Do we just shrug it off, call it a conspiracy theory and go back to, endless scrolling on Instagram? Or do we actually take a step back and think about what kind of world we're leaving behind for the next generation? Look, I'm not saying you need to start building a bunker in your backyard or cancel your Netflix subscription in protest. That's not the takeaway here. The real message is awareness. Bezmenov and guys like him weren't telling us to panic. They were telling us to pay attention, to look beyond the headlines, the tweets, the sound bites, and ask the uncomfortable questions, even if it makes people roll their eyes at you. It is on you, to be true to yourself. And here's the thought. What if we just stopped taking things at face value? What if we started questioning the narratives that get spoon-fed to us every day, whether it's from the media, the government, or even your favorite influencer? I mean, if a guy can sell you a protein shake while wearing a Gucci tracksuit, who's to say someone else isn't selling you a worldview? And you've got to think about that. You are the commodity to these people. Now, let's be real. This isn't easy. And it's way more comfortable to stay in the bubble, to stay in the matrix, to binge watch your shows, to order your Uber Eats and pretend like the world's problems are just someone else's to solve. But comfort is the enemy of change. And if we're too comfortable, too distracted, or too divided to see the big picture, well, that's when the termites win. And here's what I want you to do after this. Just one thing. The next time you hear about a new policy, a new crisis, or some solution being rolled out, ask yourself, who benefits from this? Follow the money, follow the power, and do not be afraid to ask, what's the catch? Because there's always a catch. And here's the good news. It's not all doom and gloom. There are forces trying to shape the world in ways that we might not like. But the beauty of living in a democracy, let's face it, or whatever version of what we've got left, is that we still have a say. It starts with conversations like this, with waking up just a little bit, because once you see the game being played, it's a lot harder. It is a lot harder to be manipulated by it. So where do we go from here? We keep asking questions, we keep connecting the dots, and maybe, just maybe, we stop letting apathy be the final stage of ideological subversion. Because if there's one thing that Bezmenov didn't account for, it's the fact that people can still surprise you. We've woken up before and we can do it again. It's not about paranoia, it's about awareness. And I'd take an awake society over blind one any day of the week. And let me just leave you with this little nugget, okay? History isn't just full of failures. It's full of people who took the initiative and won. Think about the civil rights movement or the fall of the Berlin Wall. There were moments where people stood up, refused to be divided, and said, enough is enough. So yeah, things might feel overwhelming, but we've been here before, and there's one thing history shows us. It's that people are stronger, a lot stronger than the systems trying to break them. All right, that's it for today. If you're still with me, congratulations. You have survived the Alice in Wonderland's rabbit hole. I appreciate you coming on. And think, if you've made it, or if I've pissed you off, either way, let me know. Hit me up in the comments, send me a message. Let's keep the conversation going, because whether you agree or not, one thing's for sure, we got a lot to talk about. I appreciate you listening. This is Real Talk with Arky Jones. That's me. I'll see you later. Cheers.